The moment you stop running from your own company is the moment your real life begins. How many of you have ever found yourself reaching for your phone the instant you're alone? How many times have you turned on music, called a friend, or found any excuse to fill the silence rather than sit with yourself for even 10 minutes? Raise your hand if you've done this in the past week. You see those hands. And those of you who didn't raise yours are probably lying to yourselves right now. Here's a truth that will shake you. Most people are more afraid of being alone with themselves than they are of death itself. They would rather endure physical pain than mental silence. They fill every moment with noise, activity, and other people's praise because they're terrified of what they might hear when everything gets quiet. Your society has programmed you to believe that being alone is somehow wrong, incomplete, or broken. From childhood, you're told to make friends, be social, and network. You're conditioned to measure your worth by how many people want to be around you, how busy your calendar is, how quickly someone responds to your messages. This programming runs so deep that most of you feel guilty when you choose solitude over social obligations. But what if I told you that this conditioning is precisely what's keeping you weak, dependent, and powerless? What if I told you that your need for others to validate your existence is the very thing that prevents you from ever truly existing at all? Think about this. When you constantly seek approval from others, whose life are you really living? When you make decisions based on what others will think, whose dreams are you pursuing? When you can't bear to be alone with your thoughts, whose thoughts are you actually thinking? The uncomfortable answer is that you're living everyone else's life except your own. Your power doesn't come from others, it comes from your ability to stand complete within yourself. Every external source of validation you depend on is a leak in your personal power. Every person whose approval you need is someone who controls a piece of your destiny. Every moment you can't spend alone peacefully is a moment you remain a stranger to your own strength. Let me tell you about Sarah, though that wasn't her real name. She was 42 years old when her world collapsed completely. In the span of 6 months, she lost her job of 15 years, her husband left her for someone younger, and her teenage children chose to live with their father. Her social circle, which had been built around her marriage and career status, evaporated overnight. The phone that used to ring constantly fell silent. The calendar that was once packed with meetings and social events became completely empty. For the first time in her adult life, Sarah was completely, utterly alone. The initial panic was overwhelming. She would wake up in the morning and immediately start planning activities, any activities, to avoid spending time by herself. She volunteered for causes she didn't care about, took classes she wasn't interested in, and accepted invitations from acquaintances she barely knew. She kept the television on constantly, even while sleeping, because the silence felt like drowning. For 3 months she ran from herself like this, but running is exhausting, and eventually she couldn't maintain the pace anymore. One Tuesday evening she found herself sitting in her empty house with nowhere to go and no one to call. The panic rose in her chest like a tide, but instead of fighting it, something inside her just stopped. She sat there in the silence. For the first time in decades, she didn't reach for a distraction. She didn't turn on the television or call anyone or make plans. She just sat there and listened to her own breathing. At first, her mind raced with worries, regrets, and fears. But as the minutes passed, something unexpected happened. Underneath all that mental noise, she began to hear something else. A quiet that had been trying to speak to her for years, but had been drowned out by the constant chatter of other people's opinions and expectations. That told her she had never actually liked her career in marketing. It told her she had always wanted to write, but had dismissed it as impractical. It told her that many of her friendships had been built on convenience rather than genuine connection. It told her that she had been living according to a script written by others, not by her own heart. In that silence, Sarah met herself for the first time. Over the following weeks, she began spending time alone intentionally rather than running from it. She would sit in her garden for an hour each morning with coffee, no phone, no book, just watching the birds and listening to her thoughts. She discovered that when she wasn't constantly seeking other people's input, her own ideas became clearer and more creative. When she wasn't worried about what others thought, she made decisions faster and with more confidence. She started writing, not for publication or recognition, but because the words demanded to be written. She realized she had opinions about things she'd never even known she cared about. She developed preferences she'd never noticed when she was constantly adapting to other people's tastes. She found she had a sense of humor that was uniquely hers when she wasn't trying to please everyone else.
6 months later, Sarah had completed her first novel. A year later, it was published. 2 years later, she was making more money as a writer than she ever had in marketing. But more importantly, she had discovered something that no external achievement could provide: the unshakable foundation of her own company. Sarah learned the difference between loneliness and solitude, and that difference changed everything. Loneliness is the fear-based belief that you are incomplete without others. It's the panic that arises when you're not externally stimulated. It's the desperate reaching for your phone, the constant need for noise, the inability to sit peacefully with your own thoughts. Loneliness is the feeling that something is wrong when you're alone. Solitude, on the other hand, is the conscious choice to commune with your highest self. It's the recognition that the most important relationship you'll ever have is the one with yourself. Solitude is not the absence of others, it's the presence of you, fully and completely. When you're lonely, time drags. When you're in solitude, time disappears. When you're lonely, you feel depleted. When you're in solitude, you feel restored. When you're lonely, you're running from yourself. When you're in solitude, you're coming home to yourself. The same physical situation, being alone in a room, creates entirely different emotional experiences based on your mental approach. If you believe you need others to be complete, being alone feels like punishment. If you know you are complete within yourself, being alone feels like freedom. Look at the most powerful figures throughout history. They didn't become powerful by constantly seeking others' approval. They became powerful by developing such a strong relationship with themselves that they could stand alone if necessary. They made their most important decisions in solitude. They found their greatest insights in silence. They developed their strongest convictions away from the crowd. Every great leader, artist, inventor, and visionary has understood this secret. Your external power is directly proportional to your internal peace, and internal peace can only be cultivated in solitude. But here's what stops most people from accessing this power. They're afraid of what they might find when they look inside. When was the last time you sat in complete silence with yourself for 1 hour without any distractions? No phone, no music, no book, no television, no other people. Just you and your thoughts for 60 minutes. If you can't remember the last time you did this, you're not alone. Most people haven't done this since childhood, if ever. What are you afraid you might find in that silence? What thoughts are you avoiding? What feelings have you been running from? What truths about your life have you been too busy to face? These are not comfortable questions, but they're the questions that determine whether you live as a free person or as a prisoner of other people's expectations. How much of your daily activity is genuine purpose versus escape from your own thoughts? Be honest. How many of the things you do each day are actually moving you toward your authentic goals, and how many are just sophisticated forms of avoidance? Most people's lives are elaborate escape mechanisms designed to avoid ever having to sit alone with themselves. They schedule every moment, fill every silence, and surround themselves with people and activities, not because these things serve their highest good, but because they're running from the discomfort of self-examination. But here's what they don't realize. That discomfort is not a problem to be solved, it's information to be processed. The thoughts and feelings that arise in solitude are not your enemies, they're your teachers. The silence you're avoiding is not empty, it's full of everything you need to know about creating the life you actually want. This brings us to the fundamental choice that determines the entire trajectory of your life. Will you continue seeking completion outside yourself, or will you claim the wholeness that already exists within you? Every day you make this choice dozens of times. When you feel uncomfortable and immediately reach for your phone, you're choosing to seek completion outside yourself. When you make decisions based on what others will think rather than what you truly want, you're choosing to seek completion outside yourself. When you can't enjoy your own company, you're choosing to believe you're incomplete. But you have another option. You can choose to see yourself as already whole, already complete, already enough. You can choose to view alone time not as something to be endured, but as something to be treasured. You can choose to develop such a strong relationship with yourself that you become genuinely fascinating to be around. This single decision to claim your inherent completeness rather than seeking it elsewhere immediately shifts your relationship with everyone and everything around you. When you're not trying to get something from others, you can actually give something to them. When you're not seeking their approval, you can offer your authentic self. When you don't need them to complete you, you become truly valuable to them. Think about the people you're most drawn to in life. Are they the ones who desperately need your attention and approval? Or are they the ones who seem complete within themselves, who would be fine with or without your presence? The answer is obvious. We're attracted to wholeness, not neediness. We're drawn to people who have something to give, not people who are constantly taking. When you develop this completeness within yourself, everything changes. You stop making decisions from desperation and start making them from strength. You stop tolerating situations that don't serve you because you're not afraid of being alone. You stop compromising your values for acceptance because you accept yourself completely. This is what it means when I say alone doesn't mean lonely, it means powerful. When you can stand alone, you can stand anywhere. When you can be happy with yourself, you can be happy anywhere. When you don't need others to validate your existence, you become invaluable to everyone around you. But here's the key. This power can only be developed in solitude. You cannot fake the strength that comes from genuine self-acceptance. You cannot pretend to have the confidence that comes from knowing yourself completely. You cannot manufacture the peace that comes from being comfortable in your own skin. These qualities can only be cultivated through regular, intentional time alone with yourself. Not busy alone time, not distracted alone time, but pure, silent, undiluted solitude,
where you have nowhere to hide from who you really are. Your relationship with yourself is the foundation upon which every other relationship in your life is built. If that foundation is shaky, if you don't really know yourself, if you can't enjoy your own company, if you need constant external validation, then every other relationship will be unstable too. But when you build a solid foundation through solitude, when you become genuinely comfortable being alone, something remarkable happens. You stop attracting people who need you to complete them, and you start attracting people who are complete within themselves. You stop having relationships based on mutual neediness and start having relationships based on mutual strength. The quality of your external life is always a reflection of the quality of your internal life. If your internal life is chaotic, your external life will be chaotic. If your internal life is peaceful, your external life will be peaceful. If your internal life is powerful, your external life will be powerful. And the only way to develop a powerful internal life is to spend time there regularly, alone, in the silence where your true self lives. The farmer who understands seasons never panics during winter, and the person who understands life's patterns never breaks during difficulties. Who among you has ever seen a farmer in December crying because his fields are empty? Who has ever witnessed a gardener in January digging frantically, worried that spring will never come? You haven't, because they understand something that most people don't. Life operates in predictable cycles, and winter is not the enemy of growth, it's the preparation for it. Yet most of you treat the difficult periods in your life like emergencies instead of seasons. You panic when things get quiet. You despair when progress seems slow. You abandon your goals the moment you hit resistance, as if resistance wasn't supposed to be part of the process. Here's what successful people know that struggling people don't. External circumstances are temporary weather, but internal development is permanent soil. You can have the best opportunities in the world, but if your internal soil isn't prepared, nothing will grow. You can face the worst circumstances imaginable, but if your internal soil is rich, you'll eventually produce a harvest. Most people spend their lives trying to control the weather instead of enriching their soil. They waste enormous energy attempting to manipulate external conditions while neglecting the only thing they actually have complete control over, their own growth. Think about this. Every seed that ever became a mighty tree spent time in darkness. Every seed had to surrender to a process it couldn't see or understand. The seed doesn't know when it will sprout or how long winter will last. It simply does what seeds do. It grows in the darkness, sending roots down before it ever sends shoots up. This is exactly what happens during your periods of solitude and apparent inactivity. While others see you as doing nothing, you're actually doing the most important work possible, developing roots. You're building the invisible foundation that will support everything visible you create later. But here's where most people go wrong. They judge their progress by what's happening above ground instead of what's happening below ground. They measure their worth by immediate results instead of internal development. They abandon their growth during the underground phase because they can't see anything happening. The most successful people in any field understand this principle completely. They know that the time they spend alone, thinking, planning, learning, and developing themselves is never wasted time. It's the most productive time they have. While others are networking frantically and trying to manipulate outcomes, they're in their private spaces enriching their soil. When you spend intentional time alone, several things happen that cannot happen any other way. First, you begin to hear your own thoughts clearly. Most people's minds are so filled with other people's opinions, expectations, and demands that they never actually hear their own. In solitude, that becomes clear and strong. Second, you start to see patterns that chaos obscures. When you're constantly reacting to external stimuli, you can't see the larger picture. But when you step back into silence, patterns become obvious. You begin to notice that certain types of thoughts lead to certain types of results. You start to see that certain situations repeat in your life until you learn the lesson they contain. Third, you develop what I call strategic patience. Most people have emotional patience. They can endure difficulties while complaining about them. But strategic patience is different. It's the ability to endure difficulties while using them for your advantage. It's the recognition that today's problems are tomorrow's wisdom, and today's challenges are tomorrow's strength. This brings us to one of the most important truths about life. Everything operates in cycles, and understanding these cycles gives you enormous power. Just as nature has seasons, your life has seasons. There are times for planting, times for growing, times for harvesting, and times for rest. Most people fight these cycles instead of working with them. In your planting season, you sow seeds without seeing immediate results. This is when you're learning new skills, building new habits, making connections, and investing in your future. Most people get discouraged during planting season because they're looking for harvest season results. They plant a seed on Monday and expect fruit on Tuesday. In your growing season, you tend what you've planted. You water your goals with consistent action. You weed out distractions and bad habits.
You protect your dreams from critics and doubters. This is often the longest and most frustrating season because you can see growth, but you can't yet enjoy the fruits of your labor. In your harvest season, you reap what you've sown. This is when opportunities seem to come from everywhere, when years of preparation suddenly pay off, when people call you lucky because they didn't see the planting and growing that came before. And in your rest season, you recover, reflect, and prepare for the next cycle. This is not laziness, it's wisdom. The farmer who doesn't let his fields rest will eventually have no harvest at all. Here's what changes everything. Once you understand which season you're in, you stop fighting it and start maximizing it. If you're in planting season, you plant more seeds instead of complaining about the lack of fruit. If you're in growing season, you tend your garden instead of trying to harvest what isn't ready. If you're in harvest season, you gather everything available instead of worrying about the next planting. But there's something even more powerful than understanding seasons. Understanding that difficulties and opportunities are not separate events, they're two faces of the same coin. Every difficulty contains the seed of equivalent opportunity, and every opportunity contains the seed of equivalent difficulty. Most people see problems and opportunities as opposites. They believe life is either good or bad, easy or hard, flowing or stuck. But mature people understand that problems and opportunities are dance partners. They show up together, they work together, and they leave together. When you're facing a significant challenge, ask yourself this question: what opportunity is hidden in this difficulty? What skill is this situation forcing me to develop? What strength is this experience building in me? What connection is this problem helping me make? What clarity is this confusion ultimately bringing me? The answer to these questions can only be found in solitude. When you're in the middle of drama, surrounded by other people's opinions and emotions, you can't see clearly. But when you step back into silence, the hidden opportunities become obvious. Let me tell you about Marcus, a man who understood this principle completely. He was a construction worker who lost his job when the housing market crashed. At first, he did what most people do. He panicked, complained, and sent out resumes frantically. But after 2 months of this approach yielding nothing, he did something different. He began spending 2 hours every morning in complete silence, not looking for jobs, not making plans, just sitting quietly and observing his thoughts. After a week of this practice, something occurred to him. He noticed that every house he'd worked on had the same problem: poor insulation that led to high energy bills. He realized he'd been thinking about this problem for years, but had never had the time or mental space to consider a solution. In his solitude, an idea began forming. What if he started a business specifically focused on retrofitting homes for energy efficiency? He knew the construction side, and he could learn the energy side. Instead of looking for another job building new houses, he could create a business fixing existing ones. But here's the key: this idea only came to him in silence. When he was busy networking, applying for jobs, and listening to other people's advice, his mind was too cluttered to hear his own wisdom. It was only when he stopped the external activity and spent time alone with his thoughts that the solution appeared. Marcus spent 6 months learning everything he could about energy efficiency while doing odd jobs to pay the bills. He used his unemployment period not as time to waste, but as time to prepare. When the economy recovered, he wasn't looking for a job, he was hiring employees. His business became enormously successful because he had solved a real problem that he'd observed during his years in construction. But more importantly, he had learned to use solitude as a strategic tool. Every major decision in his business was made during his morning silence periods. Every innovation came from quiet reflection. Every opportunity was recognized because he had trained himself to see patterns clearly. This is the power of understanding that life operates in predictable patterns. When you know that difficulties are followed by opportunities, you don't waste energy fighting the difficulties. You use them to prepare for the opportunities. When you know that confusion is followed by clarity, you don't panic during confusion. You sit with it until the clarity emerges.
But here's what most people miss. Opportunities rarely announce themselves with trumpets and fanfare. They usually arrive disguised as problems, extra work, or impossible requests. The person who has trained themselves to see clearly through solitude recognizes these disguised opportunities while others see only obstacles. Your ability to recognize opportunities is directly related to the quality of your thinking, and the quality of your thinking is directly related to the time you spend in silence. Noisy minds miss opportunities that quiet minds catch immediately. Think about the most successful people you know personally. Not the ones you see on television, but the ones in your actual life who seem to consistently make good decisions and seize good opportunities. I guarantee you they have developed some form of regular solitude practice, whether they call it that or not. They have times when they step back from the chaos and think clearly about what they're doing and where they're going. They understand something that busy people don't. Preparation in private determines performance in public. The conversations you have with yourself during solitude are infinitely more important than the conversations you have with others in public. Your success is not determined by how well you can impress people at parties. It's determined by how honestly you can think when nobody else is watching. This is why small daily habits matter so much, not because each individual action is particularly powerful, but because consistency in small things builds the mental discipline necessary for success in large things. When you commit to 15 minutes of solitude every morning for a year, you're not just getting 15 minutes of quiet time, you're building the spiritual muscle that allows you to make difficult decisions, stay committed when others quit, and see opportunities that others miss. Consider this. What would happen if you spent just 15 minutes every morning in complete silence, with no agenda other than to be present with your own thoughts? What would happen if you spent 10 minutes every evening reflecting on the day's events and extracting lessons from them? What would happen if you committed to 1 hour of uninterrupted solitude every week for planning and strategic thinking? Most people think they don't have time for these practices, but that's backwards thinking. You don't have time not to do these practices. Every minute you spend in strategic solitude saves you hours of confused activity. Every moment of clarity you gain prevents days of wandering in circles. The person who spends 15 minutes each morning getting clear on their priorities accomplishes more in one day than the person who jumps straight into activity accomplishes in a week. The person who reflects on their experiences extracts wisdom that prevents them from repeating costly mistakes. The person who regularly evaluates their direction catches problems while they're still small and adjusts course before minor issues become major disasters. But these practices can only be done alone. You cannot gain clarity about your life while listening to other people's opinions about your life. You cannot develop your own judgment while constantly seeking approval from others. You cannot build internal strength while depending on external validation. The patterns of your life become clear only when you have the mental space to observe them. The opportunities in your current situation become obvious only when you're not distracted by constant noise and activity. The solutions to your problems emerge only when you stop frantically searching for them and allow them to arise naturally from your own wisdom. This is why solitude is not selfish, it's strategic. When you take time alone to think clearly, everyone around you benefits from your improved judgment. When you use silence to process your experiences and extract wisdom, everyone you interact with benefits from that wisdom. When you develop the strength that comes from self-knowledge, everyone in your life benefits from your stability. Your external effectiveness is always limited by your internal development. You cannot give what you don't have, and you cannot consistently perform above the level of your character. The time you spend building your character in solitude is an investment that pays dividends in every area of your life. What does your daily behavior teach others about how to treat you? Most never ask themselves that, yet everything you allow, ignore, or tolerate sends a message, not just to the outside world but to your own mind. Respect isn't taught through words, it's modeled through discipline. If you walk through your day cutting corners, saying yes when you mean no, breaking promises to yourself, your self-image collapses piece by piece. But when your actions align with your standards, you don't need to speak loudly. Your energy handles that for you. It starts when you wake up. The very first thing you choose sets the rhythm. Snooze the alarm and you've already trained yourself to avoid resistance. But when you rise without hesitation, you've already won a mental battle before stepping out of bed. That decision, simple, ordinary, isn't about productivity, it's about identity. You're telling yourself, I'm the kind of person who follows through, and that self-respect builds a presence people feel. Make your bed like it matters. Not because it looks nice, but because it trains your mind that order begins with you. Pour a glass of water and drink it without distraction. Fuel your body before you feed your distractions. Move, stretch, walk, breathe with purpose. Your body needs to feel your presence before the rest of the world does. These aren't wellness tips. These are identity-building behaviors. They shape how you carry yourself, how you speak, how you command space without demanding it. Then there's the mirror. Most glance, adjust, and move on. Few actually meet their own gaze. That's where the shift happens. Stand still. Look into your own eyes. Ask yourself, am I proud of how I've been showing up? Not how I look, but how I live. That self-check builds accountability. Because the most damaging lies aren't told to others, they're told in silence to yourself. You said you'd stop texting them. You didn't. You said you'd leave that job. You stayed. You said you'd take care of your body. You broke that promise again. Every lie drains your power, but every truth you face builds it back. Carry that honesty into the world. When you speak, speak like your words matter. When you listen, listen like the person matters. These aren't personality traits, they're practices. They come from the discipline of being present. Most people are too distracted to notice themselves, let alone anyone else. But when you live awake, you start to see clearly what you're allowing, what you're avoiding, and what needs to change. Self-respect shows up in boundaries, not the kind you announce loudly, but the kind you live quietly. You leave when the energy shifts. You don't over-explain. You say no without guilt, and you don't argue with people committed to misunderstanding you. That kind of boundary doesn't come from anger. It comes from clarity. And clarity is earned. It's earned in silence, in solitude, in the moments where you choose growth over comfort. And growth always asks something from you. Usually something inconvenient. Wake up earlier than you want. Have the uncomfortable conversation. Say no to people who only show up when it benefits them. Sit with your emotions instead of numbing them. Choose rest when your ego wants to prove something. Growth isn't glamorous. It's gritty. It's repetitive. It's choosing to do the right thing when the wrong thing is easier. The way you treat yourself sets the standard for everyone else. If you speak to yourself with contempt, you'll tolerate others doing the same. If you ignore your needs, you'll attract people who do too. But when you hold yourself to a higher standard, you don't need to demand respect. You reflect it. You become the kind of person who doesn't chase validation, because your worth isn't up for negotiation. You'll notice a shift. Certain people will distance themselves, not because you changed, but because you stopped shrinking. You stopped making yourself small for their comfort. That loss? It's not rejection. Let it happen. Let the spaces empty so that alignment has room to enter. It's not loneliness. It's space for real connection. And real connection doesn't require you to betray yourself to keep it. Those who resonate with your truth will stay. The rest were distractions dressed as company. And your discipline protects you from slipping back into old versions of yourself just to feel accepted. There's a quiet power in walking alone with your standards intact. In knowing that your peace wasn't handed to you, it was built. Through boundaries. Through stillness. Through every no that honored your yes. The small habits you build shape the tone of your entire life. The way you end your day matters just as much as how you begin it. Reflect without judgment. Ask yourself, where did I show up aligned? Where did I abandon myself? Don't run from the answers. Let them guide your correction. Growth doesn't require perfection. It requires honesty. Honest review, honest effort, honest choices repeated until your character sharpens like a blade, and people feel that sharpness. Not as aggression, but as presence. You don't need to sell yourself anymore. Your energy introduces you before you speak. It tells the room you know who you are. And more importantly, you know what you're not. That's rare. That's attractive. That's powerful. When you live with that kind of alignment, connection becomes effortless. You no longer seek attention. You filter for resonance. You don't need everyone. You just need real ones. People who value the truth over convenience. Who match your energy, not drain it. Who make you feel seen without performance. That kind of connection starts with you. With how you connect to yourself. Every standard you hold. Every line you refuse to cross. Every decision that says, I won't abandon myself today. That's the real work. And that work pays off, not in applause, but in peace, in clarity, in the quiet knowing that you are no longer available for anything that dishonors your growth. That's not confidence. That's commitment to who you are, to who you're becoming, to never again lowering your standards for temporary comfort. And this is where the shift begins to hold, where the new normal settles in, not as an effort, but as a lifestyle. When you're ready, I'll continue with the next section connected from here, so it flows without interruption.